Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. This episode is extremely special to me. You'll have to tune in to see why. But on this episode, we sit down with Martin Pearson, a principal on special assignment in Adams 14. We talk about all the changes that have occurred over his almost 20 years in education and how edtech and technology is playing its own place, as well as how we can handle the teacher burnout from an administrator's perspective. This was extremely special to me, and I'm so happy to have been joined by Martin Pearson on this episode. So I hope you tune in, turn it up, and as always, share, connect, and comment below. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leena Marie Saleh, the Edtech Guru. I want to thank you so much for spending time with me on this journey, for all the support that you give me, and for following along. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and let's get ready to do this. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by Martin Pearson, a principal on special assignment in Adams 14. Martin, or as I like to call him, Mr. Pearson, how are you doing today?
I am excellent, Leena. How are you?
Great. We are so honored to have you on today's show, and I'll share a little bit why in just a few minutes. But Mr. Pearson, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
So, I am 26 plus years in public education. I started off as a teacher. I taught language arts and social studies, eventually international baccalaureate for the middle school. And then I moved from that position eventually to an assistant principal job. Then I had an opportunity to move from the assistant principal position to open up a new school in a neighboring district, new middle school, and spent 6 years there, and then a couple of different principalships after that for a total of 13 years as a school principal. And now I work in human resources in the district that I was most recently a principal in. So a lot of experience, seen a lot of different systems, and just super, super excited to be taking part in this today.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited to share in that. It's not often that we bring on, regularly seasoned vets in the teaching space. So I'm really excited to share in your experience and talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, most of you are probably wondering, why am I calling Martin Mr. Pearson? Well, Mr. Pearson was my seventh grade social studies teacher. So we've stayed connected over the years. So we'll dig into that a little bit at the end, but we're going to dive into a little bit into one of the reasons why I really wanted to bring Mr. Pearson on is because I wanted to talk about bringing real world learning to the classroom. It was something that stands out to me. If you listen to me on the Frazzled Teacher, you would have heard that I actually dropped him in the episode. I didn't necessarily call him out name wise, but just the importance of bringing real world to the classroom. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And that's something that I didn't really experience too much in my when I was a student. So I'd love to learn a little bit about that from you.
Yeah, so what Lena had referred to was a project that we had done with our seventh graders. It was me and another teacher, Matt Valdez, actually, that did what we called it was basically called peace talks. And when we initially did it, I don't think either one of us had any idea the implications that this project would have. But the whole idea was to try to bring the Arab-Israeli conflict to some level of resolution. And it was timely, I think. Our standards for social studies in seventh grade at that time really weren't history, it was all geography. But I loved history so much, and so did Matt. We decided that we needed to teach it from more of a historical perspective. So by the time we got to the Middle East, it gave us this amazing opportunity to really have kids collaborate around finding some type of peaceful solution to the conflict. And Lena obviously has a Syrian background. And then I had other students who were, you know, who had parents who were straight from Israel. And we had no idea. We were young, we were kind of dumb. We did not know the the drama that potentially could ensue out of it. But I think for the kids, it gave them an opportunity to really see firsthand, as much as possible, why it was so difficult to really resolve this issue. And we talked about it as being something that will most likely be an issue for many years to come. And here we are, 2023, and the issue is still not resolved. But the kids would engage in creating treaties and trying to make agreements around just like land was the huge piece, and settlements and whatnot. And it was very personal for a lot of kids. And whenever I think of Leena, whenever I think of you, I think of you through that lens because I remember how engaged you were in that, but at the same time, your understanding of it was very different than most of the kids because they could not really relate to it the way that you.
Yeah, it was I remember being like emotional during that because my dad was so mad that I was put on the Israeli side because they have just such animosity. And I don't really actually often talk about that, but my dad is straight from Syria, and Syria and Israelis do really have quite animosity towards each other. And actually, ironically, Code Monkey, the company I worked for before, was in Israel. And so when I went to Israel and I was walking in Jerusalem, I was remembering that activity that we did and thinking about how we thought we could just split the land and we could just be like, oh, this person gets this side. But actually, when you go there, you have like the souks, which are like the markets. They're actually built like the ground is so crazy that like everything is like built on top of each other and like stacked up. So there's actually no way to like really do that. And I remember thinking like, wow, I was so dumb back then. Like I thought this would be like a good idea. But I think there was a lot of like, I remember getting really heated during that time because nobody did understand that. And coming from a Middle Eastern background, there were lots of times where, you kind of experience a bit of hate from people. And so it was just an interesting experience, but gave me the chance to kind of try to connect and try to bring myself, I mean, as a seventh grader, as much as you could, try to bring myself down to that level to be able to communicate and collaborate. And that was like one of my most probably favorite projects I've ever done as like a kid, because there just was so much that you had to think about and like be strategic about. And I think that, you don't often get those opportunities as a student to think in a lens through, strategy and history and trying to like not make anyone upset, but, really think about the results of what you decide
Yes.
you're going to do.
So I remember having a conversation with Matt and us deciding kind of how we were going to split the teams. And that decision was actually made intentional. Again, had no idea the implications of that decision, but we did that with a couple of kids. And it was because I remember when we started to introduce it, one of the things that I recognized pretty quickly was that, your understanding of the Arab side of things was profound. But I've always taught people that there's certainly two sides to every story and to every struggle. And in that particular situation, I thought it would be most beneficial for you to see it also from the other perspective. And make no mistake, it was, I don't know that I could pull that off today, but at that time was pre 9/11. It was just a different time when we were allowed to explore in education, whereas that's changed a lot. And I don't know. I when I talk to kids from that particular class, even now, that's what they talk about is peace talks. And I still somewhere in my house, I've still got that lesson plan written up and that project written up. And we actually had delivered it to CDE, the Colorado Department of Education, for them to use it in their conflict resolution curriculum 20 plus years ago. It was a big deal.
Pretty powerful. And we were just talking before we got on here. That was actually Mr. Pearson's second year teaching. So pretty crazy to, I think as younger educators, you are willing to take more risks often too with your students. And I think that those early years sometimes, and what I've actually seen is like sometimes have more impact than some of the years to follow, because you get pushed down in the system and you don't get to be as creative, and you're not as willing to, flow upstream as you
Mm,
would be as you become, more veteran in the space.
sure. Well, and the rules have changed,
Hmm.
right? Completely changed. No Child Left Behind was 2001, and the standards movement was in, I mean, it was coming along, but after No Child Left Behind hit, it really changed the game. And now I think more than anything, with the the advent of social media and whatnot, you just don't have a lot of people out there that are willing to take those risks anymore. And it's funny because we talk about it like it was a risk then, but it was just normal then. And so we didn't see it as a risk. Whereas now I would advise any teacher to send home permission slips. I would never encourage them to put anybody who comes from that region on opposing sides. We would just be super safe with it. But
I disagree. I think it may not feel like that now, but I actually think that is probably one of the better decisions that you did make.
no, and I don't think it was a bad decision. Don't get me wrong, but I just look back at it and I think that would have probably gotten me fired.
Interesting.
We
Yeah, I
just,
see
like I
that.
said, the rules have changed. The rules
Yeah.
have completely changed. So,
Yeah, it's hard
and
to
everybody
be
is on blast.
flexible. Yeah, I agree. And I
Yes.
think that project in particular, when I was in college and we were doing, all the pedagogical thinking behind why we teach the way we teach, and the constructivist type of view. And then when I went to the traditional classroom my first year, I was like, I can't do this. There's no way I can teach like this forever. So that's what really pushed me into the STEM, because you could integrate the history and you could study it and you could do the geography and you could tie all those in. You had like a little bit more creative control versus what you do in the other thing. So let's talk about that a little bit. So talk about the shift, because you've been almost in this, you've almost been teaching for 27 years, in the education space, which is crazy. I feel like
Yeah.
I just was a student, but here I am with 10 plus years under my belt of, the education space, actually 15 now at this point. What sorts of changes and things have you seen throughout your time, from your role as a teacher to a role as a principal, and now as your role as more of the HR, or I guess principal on special assignment, but really HR?
Yeah.
What sorts of changes have you seen throughout?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, I remember when I initially went to administration, and that was never, ever, ever the plan. My goal was 30 years. I was going to teach high school history. I was going to retire, and that was going to be it. And I had a mentor who told me early on that I have to keep on taking these continuing ed classes, so that I could, move up the salary schedule. And I remember my first contract was like 20,000. It's actually kind of embarrassing now. I think it was $20,500.
Do you know when I started teaching, it was 27,000?
Which is unfortunate when you think about the difference in that time span.
I know.
Because right now you are on the cutting edge in the state of Colorado if you're starting teachers at 50.
Hmm.
If somebody would have told me that that would have been considered a good salary in 2023, I would have been like, come on, that's not even realistic. But that's kind of where we're at. When I first went into administration, it was really because somebody saw something in me and I got a master's in administration and supervision. And so I was a dean, and then I went in as an AP, and we were managers. That's what we were. We made sure that everybody had the appropriate keys. We made sure that we dealt with the attendance and the behavior issues. I mean, I think fortunately to a certain degree, but we began to shift to where it all became about accountability. There is this belief out there, I think, mostly from people who've never worked in education, that teachers can get into the business and become tenured, and they can never lose their jobs, and they don't have to do this or they don't have to do that, and the unions are horrible, and just all that garbage. And so essentially what happens is we come out with these high stakes testing. And, especially in Colorado, kids began testing in third grade, and it's math and literacy. And then science hits in fifth grade. Social studies is kind of an on and off thing. We've not seen a social studies test in my district since COVID. But, what we have found is that all the curriculum now, and these curriculum companies are making, literally billions because they are writing curriculum that is supposed to be tailored to meet the ever-changing standards, whether that's Common Core or state standards. So the shift really went from being a manager to then an instructional leader. And part of the reason why I stayed being an AP as long as I did was because I did not, I only taught for 3 years. And so my lens on instruction at that time, I was such a novice, and I feel like I just want to give hugs to anybody that was in my class and apologize to them profusely because I don't necessarily believe that, as I look back on things, I think to myself, oh, I could have done that better. I could have done that way better. But, you do what you know, and know better, you do better. But now, moving into administration, being a principal, we are deciding people's lives based on those test scores. And there's nothing wrong with us, assessing what kids know and are able to do. But we've gotten to a point to where, unfortunately, we are punishing, schools and school districts based on those, accountability laws. And, it's the government entering into public ed, which is problematic, but it's also bipartisan. I don't blame either side for this. I blame them both. This was something that was agreed upon by Democrats and Republicans. And, unfortunately, it's changed the way that we educate kids. And I don't think that education is as exploratory for kids anymore as it was when I was coming up or when you were coming. We talk about the Israeli Arab conflict. We could not, based on standards, really pull that off today without potentially risking a lot. So, there's a huge shift. I also think that social media has changed the game quite a bit as well. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in more of a challenging way. Everybody has an opinion about schools because they all went to one. But much of what we read through social media is just not real. We've seen this huge debate about critical race theory. I cannot think of a single school that I've ever worked in or consulted in, and I've been doing a lot of consulting over my career, where CRT was ever even a thing. But it became this red herring, something else that we can complain about and blame on public ed. And unfortunately, I think that public education has suffered because of that, and we've gotten away from some of the tenets that are, that really have been there historically in public education. One of those tenets being equal access for all, right? That's the whole founding principle of public education, is that every single kid, regardless of their zip code, can effectively get a quality education. But then you bring in some of the social media now that we see, kind of really running all of our lives to a certain degree. And, we've really diminished what public education was there to do. And unfortunately, we can't find enough teachers anymore because they just don't want to deal with it, which I completely understand. And I've said to people before, I don't know that if I were challenged to go and choose a career now, going back almost 30 years, that I would have chose education because of the pressure that teachers are under constantly.
I'm going to touch on a couple of things that you said. And one was the textbook companies and them making a killing off of it. That is a cyclical cycle from the school districts themselves, because a school district is putting out these RFPs and saying, you must check this, this, and this box. So then these edtech companies are jumping, hiring educators to come on and rewrite these standards every single time because the state decides they want to change them. But really, the problem doesn't fundamentally lie in any sort of curriculum anywhere. It actually lies with just this system of pushing and amplifying high stakes testing And so it just becomes this cyclical cycle. And then, on this show, we always talk a lot about the teacher shortage and why teachers are leaving. And I've probably spoken to 500 educators in the last 3 years just about why they're leaving. And every single one of them is about the pressure, the not being able to create. And this is from people all over the country. So we're seeing this, thing, but we're also seeing a decrease in the pipeline, which is what you're talking about. Like the pipeline, people are not going to become a teacher because they see, first of all, the amplification of social media also, but also they just see how hard and challenging it is. And to be honest, the pace sucks. So like it's really difficult to want to do that. Who wants to work 2-3 jobs until you can, put food on the table? I just had someone on that was like, yeah, I couldn't put gas in my car. I was like, me either. I was taking a coin cup to the bank to try to fill up my car. And I'm like, I can't do this forever. Like, I love this job and I love what I'm doing, but it's just not something that makes it livable in today's world.
So I remember when I started, again, the salary was super low. And I remember I remember thinking to myself, if I could just make 30 grand a year, it'd be okay. And so my first check at 20,000 or 21, whatever it was like $1,200. And in Colorado, we get paid once a month. And I remember thinking to myself, and I never was great at math, but I do remember looking at that and going, holy hell, I have no idea how I'm going to survive on this. My rent, and I was renting a room in a townhouse, was $450 a month. I had to pay my car insurance, whatever little debt I still had from college, so I had 3 jobs. I would go to school and work, Monday through Friday. I worked in a halfway house on the weekends. And I would do 2 12-hour shifts. So I'd get there at 5, I'd go till 5 in the morning, and then do the same thing on Saturday. And that paid $10 an hour. But it was enough for me to be able to survive. And then, of course, all the sports I coached. I think you might have been on my basketball team. Where we just we did whatever we possibly could to survive. And there's this, you read it all the time, and it just bothers me to no end, is this idea that, well, you get summers off and you don't have to work during Christmas and you get a spring break and all that stuff. What most people don't understand is the standard teacher contract is usually about between 180 to 190 days, which basically means that during the summertime, what they've done is they've prorated your salary. So it's not that you are getting summers off. It just means you are taking less money over the course of the entire year to help fill that gap during the summertime. And that's when we work those second jobs. Or we do continuing ed, we work on getting other degrees, those types of things. Anybody out there who believes that teaching is just an easy thing, or you hear those crappy comments about those who can do and those who can't teach, come and spend a day in the life of an educator. It is a whole different world than what most of us think or even begin to understand. And it's just gotten significantly more difficult over the last 25 years of my career.
Yeah, I just did a workshop. I was just telling Mr. Pearson just a few minutes ago that I had done a workshop yesterday for teachers, and there was about 300 of them that I served. But during the lunchtime, I spent some time with the teachers who were, leading the conference. And we were just talking about, the time that they have off and the different things like that, and how hard it is for them and how they're working other jobs and, all those kinds of things. But I would also like to argue like these breaks of like, oh, you get the summer off and oh, you get all these other things. As a teacher's job is not a 40-hour work week. Like you don't get to take an hour and go to lunch. You barely can go pee. You can barely eat your lunch. Like I was talking to a teacher who just recently transitioned. She's like, I still eat my lunch in 15 minutes. I can't spend the whole hour eating. And I think about that now and like how much slower I eat, but like how I how I like have a little bit more time to breathe. But then you have to do your regular administrative tasks after. So I think the breaks, while they seem good in theory, they're actually mental health breaks. Like a teacher would literally crack if they didn't have those times, because you don't get to take PTO days to go to the doctor. You have to do all of that on your breaks and schedule everything in a time that isn't within the window, because there is nobody to fill your space. You are the only
and how
sole
many
carrier.
jobs Well, absolutely. And how many jobs, when you take a day off, you've got to do work to take the day off, and then you come back to more work?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lesson plans. I always thought I was really good at writing lesson plans, but they would take me hours to write them. so that I could make sure that that substitute teacher was set up for success. And then when I came back, it wasn't just about just jumping back in. It was about grading what the kids had done, checking in with the kids, dealing with some of the behavioral issues that had taken place when I had a substitute teacher. And I was blessed in that, my management and my ability to be able to manage a classroom, I think was pretty solid. And that was based on those relationships with the kids. But I will tell you, it was always a thing. And so that's why you have all these teachers who always have all these days saved up, because honestly, it's more work to take time off than it is just simply to stay in and keep on pushing through.
Yeah.
You
And I
know,
think we have that luxury, on the other side to kind of take the time off, but the work also doesn't stop. So you just have to keep doing it. But with teaching, it's like you had to prepare something beforehand. So like
uh,
you're sick, you're throwing up, and you're like, oh, I got to write this lesson plan. I got to make sure the teacher is prepared. And then because how stacked and how much pressure are on teachers, that actually when you do take a day off, no matter what you put on your lesson plan, the teacher never does it the way you wanted it to be done because they're not
yep,
you.
true.
And you actually have now lost not one, but actually 2 days of instructional time that you can't really get back. And I think that that's it's tricky because that also that now you got that on your shoulders too. And you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make these 2 days up? Like these 2 days are going to make such a huge difference. So there's an additional pressure of taking those days off as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, I just think it's hard. And as I look at it, I think about the teachers that I've worked with, and just seeing things kind of significantly change over the years. I mean, oftentimes when a teacher is gone, it also now creates a bigger burden for the entire building because we don't get enough subs. You have 5 teachers, like in my old building, if I had 6 that were out, that meant every single teacher in the building at some point during that day was going to be providing coverage. And so let's talk about what that does in terms of the overall integrity of the lessons that you have left behind for the teacher to teach when you've got how many different teachers, substitute teachers, guest teachers, in that classroom over the course of the day. It's really, really a tough business right now. And I don't know where that shift is going to happen and when it's going to happen. But I do know that these kids need to get a quality education. We definitely are constantly playing from behind in education right now. K-12 is just in a very difficult place.
Yeah, it is in a pretty difficult place. So since we do talk about, teacher shortages and those types of things. So there are 3 really main stakeholders in this. You have the teachers, you have the staff, your paras, everyone else who's in the building, and then you have
Yeah.
your students. What are some ways that we could better support our teachers, our students, and the staff to have a better experience? This could also be in a scenario, your dreamland scenario, but
So there's really a lot of things, and some of them seem just so impossible to achieve. But then others I think are really simple. I would say the first thing is we've got to get to a place where we are really starting to limit the amount of students that a teacher sees over the course of a day. If you are a language arts teacher and you are teaching in a middle school, there is a good chance that you are going to have to grade 160 to 180 essays and do it with fairly quick turnaround, which begins to then not only impact your planning, but it also impacts your time with your family or just any downtime that you may get when you're not technically on the clock. I think that we have to get to a place to where the caseloads are manageable for teachers. I also think that we've got to start giving teachers some freedom and some flexibility. I have worked really hard with some amazing teachers to implement data talks and data driven instruction and all of those pieces. But I've yet to meet a teacher that got into education because they wanted to be statistician. And yet there's that expectation. And a lot of people would say now, well, you knew what you were getting yourself into. And I hear that it's problematic because it gets at the heart of what education not only is intended to do, but also what teachers got into the business for. We're not building widgets. And there's this perception out there that we are, but we simply are not. I've been doing it so long that I recognize that a 12-year-old is not like building a 12-year-old's not like building a car. The 12-year-old has free will. The car doesn't look at you and say, man, I don't want to be built. Whereas we get that with our middle school kids all the time and our high school kids. And because of our standardization of curriculum and testing and all of that stuff, we've really approached it from this one size fits all model. And I would say that, at least from my perspective, one of the no words that we have in education now is differentiation, because it is extremely difficult to do it well. But at the same time, the needs of our kids are so diverse that you have to be able to do it. And you don't have a lot of freedom to do it the way that it honestly should be done. I remember when I wrote my master's thesis, it was around multiple intelligence theory. And, you had your kinesthetic learners, you had your more analytical kids. And the idea at that time was that we have to figure out a way to meet kids where they're at. Unfortunately, I think we're in a place where we don't necessarily have the freedom to do that. And so I think in a perfect world, kind of going back to the question you asked, if I was thinking about middle school, for example, what I would do is, and again, you'd need a lot of money to do this, but I would almost build pathways for middle school kids. When you're in sixth grade, you don't necessarily know what you're going to want to do when you grow up, per se. Man, if everything in terms of the content that you were learning was relevant towards some type of skill set or career, we get more buy-in from the kids. We talk all the time about kids needing to be college and career ready, but really CTE is something that is new in the world of public education, and everybody's hopped on it, but we're not really doing a lot to meet the needs of the kids that are in the middle at this point. We've got all sorts of career tech ed programs that are starting up. My daughter goes to a school where she is, they're on the cusp of finishing their career tech ed center on campus. And she does what we call like a biomed pathway. And so they're doing all these cool things, they're doing crime scene investigations. They're really having to dive into the bulk of what the career might look at. And at the same time, she's also learning anatomy, right? And she is having to understand body systems so she can kind of go into the medical field if she chooses to. Her high school experience thus far, and she's only a freshman, is 50 times better than what it was in middle school because it's relevant to her. So imagine having teachers who are teaching something that they believe is relevant and kids who are learning things that not only is relevant, but is applicable in their daily lives. To me, that is the golden ticket in education. We see language arts standards, for example, a personal narrative. Do you know how many times that repeats over the course of a kid's academic career, K through 12? I mean, when Morgan, my daughter, comes home and she talks about having to write a personal narrative, it's funny to me because my son, who's in fifth grade, is also writing a personal narrative. Can we move on from that? Right? We've got to get to a place to where education as a system has moved with the times. I have a good friend, and I just have to share this because it's the funniest thing. Son's not really good in math, seventh grader, and he has a question on a homework assignment that says, please draw a picture of another way, an alternative way to solve this equation. She tells him, draw a calculator. And I think that's hilarious because that is the reality of where we're at. When I was coming up, man, you didn't have Google, you didn't have all those things. And I'm not saying those are the end all to be all. I do think we have to teach kids how to think, but we are really spinning our wheels, teaching things at this point that just don't need to be repeated over and over and over again. But the tests say they do. And unfortunately, that's where we're at.
I think that's like the biggest hindrance for our people. I'm actually glad you brought it back to tech because that's what I was hoping you would bring it back to. But No, I agree. I think that's the issue with education. And, we're seeing, Chat GPT, for example. I was watching
Mm,
a YouTube video of a teacher who had, was a middle school teacher or high school teacher or something, was like having Chat GPT grade the assignments and give like authentic feedback to the students. And I thought, wow, that's so time saving. Like, what a time saving
yes,
alternative. But on the flip
yes.
side, do you then not know your students, from
Mm,
like what the feedback is giving? So I think it's a double-edged sword, but you're right. Because the standards lock you in and because the test locks you in, then you're just landlocked, I think, in with being able to move education forward. Because you're right, like those things that your daughter is learning in the CTE programs are skills that are, transferable. But like if writing a personal narrative, like that's cool. But like why aren't they like blogging or doing a YouTube vlog of a personal narrative? That's way more relevant. Like, they can still write a script, write a storyboard, like all of the other things, but like it's not adapted enough to the times of where we need it to be. And that also comes into that creative control piece. Like, does it matter that every student, we've seen that the standards, obviously, I get why they're there and they're for a purpose, for like, for a North Star sort of a thing. But overall, throughout the whole country, we're not seeing like considerable growth happen from any state because of the standard, because they lock everybody in.
no,
And that's like the problem, is there's no upward mobility from that. And the second thing I was going to say is off your point of the, teachers doing those pathways. There are some schools actually here in Texas that is a requirement. Like when you go to middle school and high school, like you choose a pathway and you're stuck in the pathway, and that's like how it goes. So I'd be interested to hear like their perspective on that. But I was talking to teachers yesterday, and I think the missing piece, and I've said this for like 1,000 years, and I don't care who's going to argue with me, but it's fine, is that we have got to give teachers a day, 1 day a week, like shorten the work week. It's not going to matter one bit of difference instructionally, really wise to students. A Friday, a Monday, Wednesday, who cares when it is, a day to think with their colleagues. Because you mentioned
yes.
this, you were collaborating with your colleague, Mr. Valdez, back in the
Mm,
day, over your project and being able to prepare it together. That is a missing component that we don't ever get to. There are so many experts and so many people that are experts that we don't give the time. And it should be like, all the fifth grade teachers are meeting together and, across the district. We're not just talking about one isolated two teachers at one school or campus, as they call them in Texas, but we're giving, and that will give the creative control, that will release the workload, I think, of teachers. We are seeing schools do a 4-day work week, but we're doing 1 day of professional development that's like mandatory every other week, but it's not planning. That's what's missing. The plan
no,
the teachers to breathe,
you,
and not the
you
daytime
are
planning, a full day.
you are 100% accurate in that. So, like, I've worked in a system where we had a 4-day work week. I've also, my kids go to a district where it's 4 days a week, and the reason why that change was made had zero to do with giving teachers an opportunity to plan. What it was doing was allowing the district to save some money. So $1 million a year, I think a million plus, because you're not running buses, you're not turning on the lights, all of that stuff. But then what we are is just reacting to the tough economic conditions, but not really capitalizing on that opportunity that we have. And I think collaboration is key. But what you hear a lot from teachers at this point is, when do they have time to collaborate? And again, it's because we are chasing tests.
Mm.
That's essentially what we're doing. And I hate to even say that, because I believe that we can be so much more. But, when I look at it and I think about, when I was working on my dissertation, I remember focusing a lot on standardized assessment. And we were looking at teacher evaluation, for example, and whether or not, if you do incentives for teachers, that it would raise test scores and whatnot. And it's very interesting that most people don't really understand how we got to the place where we have in terms of standards. I mean, No Child Left Behind and the other one, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I mean, those are most recent. But if we go back to like 1979, 1980 and look at A Nation at Risk, the whole idea was that we are going to suffer as a country and we will not be globally competitive if we don't start raising the standards for our kids. And yet, if you were to look at the actual economic performance in the United States over the last 22, 23 years, it's not gotten better because of standardized assessment. Like, I'm not saying it's bad, but my point is, I don't think it's had a bearing on our overall success and our ability to be able to compete globally. But that's what we talk about. So we start comparing math scores to those in Finland, and we start, comparing reading and writing to the scores that we see abroad. And at the end of the day, those systems are very different than ours are. And where are our kids? Number one, no matter what, you look at it historically, children in the United States always are at the top of the totem pole in terms of creativity. We are always number one. And so why are we not trying to harness that in our system? Because there's a lot of things, right, that I remember having to learn that I never used as algebra was not my friend. And I don't remember the last time I used an exponent, except for when I'm trying to help my kids solve ridiculous equations in their
I used to
homework.
love exponents. I used to love math. When you talk about data, I'm like, ooh, yes, I do. I feel like I missed my
you
call
know,
to being a data scientist,
but if that's what you love, right,
Yeah.
then you should be able to pursue that.
Hmm.
But this one size fits all model is just not effective. And so you take a very people oriented business with people who just want to go in and positively impact the lives of kids. And then you force so many things that really, in my opinion, take away from that whole deal. I mean, I was always relational with my kids. I loved that relationship with my students. A lot of teachers will tell you nowadays, when do they even have time to do that? Go to games after school. They would, try to be involved in some of their extracurricular activities. It's hard to even get them to be involved in that stuff anymore. And that to me is what's most unfortunate because those are the things that they're going to remember about, their education.
Yeah. The
You
loss
know,
of community.
Absolutely. So we've got mental health crisis happen right now with our youth. We are seeing suicide rate greatly increase. Our families are working harder than they ever have before. And so the attention that they would be paying to their kids has been diminished for what? So we can check off a box and say that my kid was proficient. I mean, come on. Even the universities now have gone away from standardized testing.
Hmm.
They want kids to be thinkers and they
Yep.
want them to be able to demonstrate some of those soft skills. What are we
They
doing?
do. And the soft skills are just going to outlive some of the other things because you can learn anything. You can learn anything on YouTube. I could like find anything that I want to learn. So it's really about scaffolding and molding that. So it's good to hear, obviously, even after all these years, that we share the same perspective on education and where education is going, and to still see the passion that you have for education, even 27 years into the
All
field.
right.
It's rare, even though education has kind of changed. Before we wrap up today, maybe you could share a little bit about, just for some fun, what I was like as a student. I hope my students don't watch this.
Not a lot about this. So there's so many adjectives that I could use.
Oh no.
But none of them are bad. I would say one of the things is that I remember you as being extremely intelligent, way, way more mature than what I've seen in most seventh graders, even today. And not mature in a bad way, almost kind of worldly, just understanding. Like I knew with you that you came from a home where education was a priority. And so you worked extremely hard. You were not a straight A kid, but you always worked hard. And I remember, you were an AB kid for the most part. Passionate.
To my father's demise.
Yeah, I know, right? Passionate, a little sassy, maybe just a bit, but I think always willing to participate, always willing to be part of the conversation. I think a natural leader. But as I think back, I mean, you were also. I mean, I remember seventh grade. I mean, you were also dealing with your own stuff, right? Like I remember you being at times a little insecure, which is very typical, and trying to figure out where you fit socially, which is extremely difficult if you're smart, right, in seventh grade, because it's not always the cool thing to be. But yeah, you were definitely one of my favorites. I Loved having you in class. I enjoyed the interaction. I learned a ton from you, and I've shared with you what I learned. And I don't know if I can tell that story. Can I tell that story?
You can.
So it's the second round of parent teacher conferences, spring conferences. And Lena comes in with her mom, and they sit down at my table. We're sitting in the gym, and her mom says to me, and I'll paraphrase, but basically it was, Lena thinks you don't like her. I was really surprised by that because I always thought I had a good relationship with her. When she'd come to class, I'd always say, "Good morning, sunshine." What I didn't realize was that Lena felt to a certain degree kind of targeted. And she didn't really understand me. And so when she came into class, I thought we were just in banter. But I think you felt like, oh my God, this dude just really doesn't like me. And then I was going to be getting a sub, and it was right around Christmas time. And Lena asked me if during the time I was out, if the kids could watch The Prince of Egypt.
I
And
asked that.
yes,
I do not.
yes,
Just so we're clear, I don't remember any of this. So
that's okay. You probably wouldn't. But I remember the things, we remember those things that are significant to us. And I said, no, we're not watching The Prince of Egypt. And I probably blew it off, right? But for you at the time, because this is what your mom brought up, and I remember you sitting there and your eyes are just welling up. And for you, you thought I hated, I remember the words were, she thinks you hate Muslims.
Hmm.
And I was, and it was heartbreaking because that, and then seeing her in tears, I mean, I look back at that and I was not as soft then as I am now. I would have had to have walked away at this day and age, just get my composure because it's heartbreaking, right? When you have a kid who you adore that doesn't realize that you adore them the way that I did Lena. So what I learned from that was that those relationships matter really in all aspects of the job. It's very easy to go into a class and have high expectations for kids and to say, everything has to be typed and everything has to be turned in on time and raise the rigor. That was never a problem for me. But that interaction I can remember like it was yesterday. And it taught me the value of making sure that you really understand the playing field that you're on with kids and why those relationships do matter. Because honestly, as a teacher, when you look at the amount of time that we spend with kids, right, the amount of time that kids spend in school, it typically is more time than they're spending at home. And the kids are supposed to look up to their teachers, not because we're heroes, but because we are imparting knowledge, right? We are giving kids an opportunity to think and to learn and to grow. And they have to know that we see the best inside of them. And from that day forward, I have always put relationships over everything. Extremely important. And I got to tell you, I am, I think, a fairly decent dad, right? And my kids, we connect on a level that, I would say a lot of parents don't connect with their kids on. And when I think about whenever Morgan, oh my gosh, that girl gives me a run for my money sometimes, right? She's a great kid, but she says what she thinks. Whenever we get into that place where her and I have kind of butted heads a little bit, I think about you
Hmm.
because I think about how important and the difference it would have made had I been able to connect with you at that time on that level so that you knew that above everything, I cared about you as a human being. So that's the genesis of I think the connection I've had with Lena over the years and the wondering I've always had. I remember when your sister was working at Outback, I think it was, and I saw her, and first thing I said to her is, "How's your sister? What's Lena doing?" And I think you were in college at that time. And it was just one of those things to see you do what you're doing. And I told you this before we started. I mean, it's just amazing the risks that you've taken, right? Like you don't see it that way. But for me, man, I would not have been, sorry for using this term, ballsy enough to step outside of my comfort zone and go after something just simply because I knew that I could not be satisfied doing things the way that I was expected to. And I had to kind of carve out my own path. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. So I'm very proud of you for that. And I think it's just awesome. And I look at all these young girls that can learn so much from what you have done right? Because I know it wasn't easy. I mean, you picked up, you left, you went to an entirely different state, you jumped into something and segued into a life that is very different than I know 20 years ago. You were not going, man, one day I'm going to be doing podcasts and I'm going to be, training 300 teachers and all of these things.
Yeah.
But you'd be the girl that would have done that. So I'm
Well,
just happy
I
to know you
appreciate
and
that.
very proud of you.
And just
Very
know
proud.
you were also one of my favorite teachers. Obviously, I wouldn't have brought it up to this day, and I still do not remember asking about the Prince of Egypt. So I don't think I don't even recall ever watching that movie. Like, I don't even think it like rings a bell for me. So that's quite funny that
Well,
would be something that
it
I
was
brought up.
I still it came out. I remember it came out that year, and you had asked to see it, and yeah, and your mom was not happy with.
Yeah, I don't know. I
She
don't
was
remember that at
not
all.
happy.
So
She was not happy. That's okay. I do remember it, and it was real. And
well, I'm sorry, I guess, that it had that big of an impact on you, but I think probably that it played in the back of my mind when students would come and they would be upset with me because I always like to banter as well. And I guess you say I'm sassy, some people say I'm bossy. It's all the same thing. But I think I was always really, made sure that I built relationships with students, because there were times where people would come to me, with their kids and be like, oh, I feel like you're not picking on them. I'm like, I just have high expectations. I don't know what to say. Like, I just think that's, so then I had to like reset and be like, oh, I need to like really work on this softer side of me to like help kind of create that relationship, or to make it known how much I guess I care about them or students or teachers or whatever happens.
at the end of the day, and this is what led me, I think, to being successful as an administrator, because it really does cross all dimensions in terms of age. People just
Mm-hmm.
know when I left my last post, I cannot tell you how many times I had say, you were my favorite boss ever, and not because I had great technical skill. I mean, I always think that I can do things, but it was those relationships, because life is hard, man. And when I look at what my kids are going through, even now, and, post, their parents got divorced, they dealt with COVID, all these crazy things, life is hard. And we just have to meet people where they're at. And I think, kind of to close it off, from my perspective at least, that's where education needs to be, right? The bottom line is kids every single day have access to a million things that are far more interesting than somebody being on the stage in their classroom, right? So let's meet them where they're at. And I think technology is a great way to do it, but it's not just about putting a Chromebook in front of them. It's about giving them a compass. Give them something that they can do with it so that they can make meaning in their lives, because it's here to stay.
It is. And it's not slowing down, as I say. So adapt or don't. That's really where
Or
we
get
are in
out.
this. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
well, Mr. Pearson, it was an absolute pleasure having you
will not
on.
call me Martin.
It feels weird. I can't call him Martin. I'm sorry, you guys. Just Mr. Pearson to me, always will be. So he even said, you don't have to call me Mr. Pearson. I'm like, it's just, I have to. I can't change it. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed this episode and took some things away. Please make sure to share in the comments everything that you took away from today's episode. And so, Mr. Pearson, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Go Chiefs.
Yeah,
Go
I don't
Chiefs.
like that he has
I know this was recorded
just
after
so you
the
know.
fact, but go Chiefs.
Just so everyone knows, I'm a Broncos fan, and that is quite abominable to me to see the Chiefs in the background, but hats off to the Chiefs for their hard work.
It's like I tell Broncos fans all the time, not everybody's perfect. I get it.
All right. Well, with that, we will see everybody next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much. You've made it this far. We are so thankful that you're here. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, comment below, and join us for all of our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us as we disrupt education together. See you guys soon. Bye, everybody.